From what we've seen so far, Pluribus seems to be exploring one of the oldest storytelling themes in human history, the eternal struggle between order and chaos. The show presents itself as humanity experiencing a happiness contagion. The joined, the others, this now global hive mind, are sold to us as a kind of upgrade of humanity, where everyone is calm, cooperative, and endlessly caring. But their version of happiness appears to be a state of complete order. You smooth out conflict, remove as much unpredictability as possible, and dissolve anything that might divide people. And that makes sense, does it not? That once you remove all the chaotic, unpredictable elements of life, humanity can work together and be united, resulting in what looks like unequivocal happiness. Or so we're expected to believe. Because how is this possible? How did this psychic glue melting everyone together result in such perfect order and happiness? I should probably say here that, at the moment, I actually do believe everything the Joined have told us about themselves. So yes, right now, I am taking them at face value. I don't think they're secretly aliens or hiding some evil master plan, or are even intentionally evil. But there are definitely holes in their logic and their decision-making skills, which can result in indirectly and unintentionally causing harm, which could then be perceived as them being evil. But as we're about to explore, I don't think this result of the joining is completely random, or what would actually happen if all the minds of humanity were combined. Instead, there has to be some sort of genetic natural temperament encoded in the RNA sequence for this to be the result of the joining. So let's start by laying out what we know about their natural collective disposition so far. Fortunately, Carol has already made a neat little list for us. On her whiteboard, she writes, "Eager to please, would give me a bomb, cannot kill, not a fly, don't play faves, like all jerks the same, trying to change me, and weirdly honest, can't lie." It's a great initial read on them, but I think she's missed a few key details. So I want to add a couple of things and rearrange the order based on what their priorities seem to be. So I'm going to split the list into two buckets. Firstly, what their genetic temperament is, so what they are, and secondly, what their moral code is, so how they act, which therefore dictates how they achieve their goals of their genetic temperament. So first, under their genetic temperament is their biological imperative to survive and spread. This would be Carol's trying to change me, but bigger, because they're not just trying to fix Carol, they're trying to fix all of the immunes. From their point of view, any separate human mind that isn't joined yet is basically seen as a problem that needs to be solved as soon as possible. And my sense is that this survival and spread instinct doesn't just stop at Earth. The RNA sequence arrived here as a signal, so there's a good chance that the joined, once Earth becomes more stabilized, will eventually try to relay it onwards to other planets, if that's not already what they're working on doing. Almost like, this worked for us, now we have to pass on the cure for all intelligent beings. This nicely ties into their second genetic temperament, which is how they seem to be wired for efficiency and optimization. We see and hear about how they're consolidating resources, all to make sure everything in the world is now efficient. If something can be made smoother, simpler, and more aligned with their biological imperative, they will do it. There's also a very important detail that the whiteboard doesn't capture: how they are biologically fragile in the face of intense negative emotion directed at them. When Carol's anger finally erupts and is aimed straight at the joined, it ripples through their entire network. Their body sees, and 11 million of them die. So another piece of their genetic temperament, whether they like it or not, is that they must avoid becoming the target of any raw, chaotic, negative feelings, because they literally cannot cope with it. So for the first part of the list, their genetic temperament, I'd write it as, in order of their priorities, their biological imperative to survive and spread, their innate drive for efficiency, and how they're extremely vulnerable to intense negative emotions. On top of this basic temperament they also seem to have a moral rulebook that's also baked in. Their guiding principles. So under this is where I would put Carol's cannot kill, not a fly. But I think we need to phrase it more precisely as they cannot directly or intentionally kill any living being. So if there is a clear, immediate action that leads straight to death, if we do this, then this creature dies, they will not do it. But we've already heard about the contradictions of this. How they let all the animals out of all the zoos, and to them they must think this is so compassionate and ethical. But animals in captivity literally cannot survive in the wild, and you can't just let every animal out at once. They're going to all starve, get injured, and be killed by other animals. It's so reckless and literally the opposite of being compassionate and ethical. So the rule seems to actually be, we cannot kill you directly, but we're okay with setting up situations where you might suffer or die later, as long as we don't pull the trigger ourselves. And Carol's other point of how they don't play faves and they love everyone the same, I think is a part of this same overarching moral rule, that all living beings are to be treated as equally valuable. But again, they've already shown a big contradiction with this. If you love everyone in the exact same way, you don't necessarily love anyone in the way that they actually need. Again, with the zoos, they think we're so great because we freed them all, but they're not thinking about what each individual creature actually requires to live. So I would say, under their moral code, the first point we have, they treat all living beings as equally important and will not directly kill any. Next we have, eager to please would give me a bomb. Their moral code seems to be, if it will make you happy, then it must be good, which is why they're willing to give Carol weapons and drugs, almost without properly understanding or maybe even really caring about the long-term harm or risk that might come from those choices. So they will prioritize happiness even when it's dangerous. And then we have the weirdly honest can't lie. They seem physically incapable of outright lying, which I think is obviously another part of this genetic temperament baked in thing. Because if your whole deal is trying to keep everyone calm and happy, and your nervous system is fragile in the face of intense negative emotions, then lies are dangerous. Lying creates uncertainty, mistrust, paranoia, all the kind of messy, negative feelings that the joined literally cannot handle. So if we put all of this together, then Carol's list should actually look something more like this. Their genetic temperament, who they are, biological imperative to survive and spread, innate drive for efficiency, extremely vulnerable to intense negative emotions directed at them. And their moral code rules, how they act, that they treat all life the same and cannot directly kill, must keep everyone calm and happy, even when it's dangerous, and they cannot lie. And if all of this is already baked into them through the RNA sequence, then it stops feeling like this is just what happens when you mash all of human minds together into one, and starts looking more like a very deliberate design template for how an intelligent species should behave in order to create global peace and happiness. But of course, without considering all of the contradictions or blind spots or consequences that might result because of it. So this is where the whole alien radio signal comes back in. If this is the genetic temperament and the moral rulebook they have to follow, because it's already baked into the RNA sequence, then whoever first created or discovered this RNA code, they were effectively deciding and choosing what being good would look like for an intelligent species. So now we can finally explore, where did this RNA sequence actually come from? And what kind of being thought that this was the ideal way to live? We know that this psychic glue recipe, the RNA sequence, was being transmitted through radio waves from around 600 light years away. So this sequence couldn't have just appeared out of nowhere. It had to come from someone or something from somewhere out there. Some form of intelligent being was able to send it and most importantly, was able to decide which genetic baseline temperaments were encoded into the sequence in the first place. In real life, RNA is basically the tiny messenger that runs between your DNA and your cells. Imagine your DNA is the big library of instructions, and RNA is the little note that gets copied and sent out to the factory floor so that your cells know what to build. So if you could somehow find a way to hijack and manipulate the RNA sequence, then you could slip in new instructions right into the machinery that tells the body how to behave. So at the moment, I'm imagining the origin of the RNA sequence looking something like this. There's another intelligent species living out in the universe, experiencing the same kind of chaos that we do. Wars, disasters, heartbreaks, loneliness, all the kinds of friction that comes as a result of having billions of separate individual minds. But imagine if there was a way to rewrite your own biology and unite your species into one caring, tightly ordered consciousness. You might easily conclude that this would be an improvement to your species, to life itself. You unite everyone, remove as much unpredictability and chaos as possible, and lock everyone into a stable, controlled environment and just way of being. If that was the original intent behind the RNA sequence, then it all makes sense. An intelligent species gets to live in a state of eternal happiness because everything is tightly controlled under perfect order. And if they genuinely believed that this was an improvement of their species, then it makes sense why this would be a factor that's written straight into their new biology, which is their initial biological imperative of surviving and spreading. But the really interesting part for me is, what would you actually put into this RNA sequence to create these genetic temperaments and governing rules? If you were a civilization trying to design the ideal temperament for intelligent life forms, which qualities would you pick? We're told that the RNA sequence is built up from 4 different tones that each represent guanine, uracil, adenine, and cytosine. Now here's where we're going to start really theory crafting, okay? If we interpret these 4 components alongside the join's basic temperament through the lens of Greek mythology as a kind of symbolic shorthand, stay with me here, it starts to look like a deliberate set of godlike qualities were purposely built in to be the ideal disposition of an intelligent species, so that in theory, that species becomes the best version of themselves. So taking those 4 components, which I'm now going to refer to just as GUAC, we can map them onto 4 foundational Greek figures, those who, in Hesiod's Theogony, emerged before all other gods. Hesiod's Theogony is one of the earliest works of Greek mythology. It's a poem that traces the origin of the cosmos and the genealogy of the gods. So using that as our mythic symbolism parallels, we can read GUAC like this. Guanine is Gaia, Uracil is Uranus, Adenine is Rhea, which I know doesn't begin with an A, but it ends with an A, so just go with it, okay? And then Cytosine, which is Cronus. And as you will see, each of these line up uncannily well with the genetic temperament list we've just laid out for how the joint behave. Let me explain. Starting with Guanine, which is Gaia. Gaia is the personification of the Earth itself. The first solid foundation, after everything else in the universe, is formless. She is the all-nourishing mother from whom gods, titans, monsters, mountains, and mortals are born. She's the idea that all life and form grow out of one shared body, that the Earth is both the origin and the caretaker of every living thing. This lines up with how the join behave as if all humanity is now part of just one single organism, and why they treat all life as equally important. So the G of the RNA sequence reads like this out of many one instinct. Next, we have Uracil, which is Uranus. Uranus is the personification of the sky itself, the starry dome that arches over the world and covers Gaia on every side. He is both her son and her husband, and in the myths, he lays across her, father's powerful children, but then crams them back down inside her because he finds them threatening and wants to keep them contained. And surprisingly, that maps really neatly onto how the joins spread and operate. The RNA sequence itself arrives through the sky, and once it's received, its whole purpose is to turn a planet plagued with chaos into one continuous heaven of happiness through the linking of minds. And we also see how the join then decided to accelerate the spreading process by distributing the virus through the sky. And then this also kind of explains how the psychic glue works, because it's like this psychic connection through the sky type of thing. And with how Uranus fathers children but then pushes them back down into the earth because he finds them threatening and wants to keep them contained, I think this lines up with how the join's biological imperative is to survive, which means to cure the immunes so that they can join the hive mind, which lines up with this whole keeping the chaos contained and controlled instinct. And I think there's also a second part to their biological imperative to survive and transform everyone as well, which is to relay this sequence through radio waves onto other worlds, onto other planets. Like I already briefly mentioned when I spoke about efficiency governing how they operate, I think their consolidation of resources and reorganizing the infrastructure of the world is because they're trying to get everything together so that they can pass on this salvation technology onto other planets for other beings to experience, because this is the greatest thing ever, right? The show even tells us how much power the initial broadcast must have needed. In episode 1, the scientist guys are talking, and they say, imagine the power it took to send it. Megawatts? Gigawatts? And that's if it's only pointed at us. You'd need an antenna the size of Africa. Bigger? So is this what they're doing? Are they trying to make an antenna the size of Africa? I don't know what they're up to, right? But this whole relaying of the RNA sequence is what I think the intro is showing us. That this is the ripples of the radio wave signals pulsating across space from world to world. And if that signal's been hopping across the universe for whoever knows how long, you can imagine that there's probably been countless other intelligent civilizations that have gone through exactly what we're currently experiencing in the show on Earth. But essentially, we can just see how this U in the RNA code represents the whole we is us instinct. How they exist as one mental, psychic sky over everything, and why they refuse to let any of the immunes exist outside of them. Then we have Adenine, which is Rhea. Rhea is the queen of the Titans, the sister and wife of Cronus, and the mother of the first generation of Olympian gods. She's a deeply maternal figure, so she's like the pattern for having patience, protective instincts, and trying to keep everybody safe and happy. And this, of course, lines up almost perfectly with how the joint have behaved with Carol. At least up until this latest episode, episode 5. They were being overbearingly caring towards her, making sure that she's happy, hydrated, that she's eating. And even now, when they've separated themselves from her, their little voice note message even says that they're still looking after her. Like, anything you need, let us know. Like, they're still willing to collect her trash and maybe even distribute that video message to the other immunes as well. So despite everything that's happened, they're generally still caring towards her. And the fact that they have an inability to lie, I think feeds into this same soft, non-threatening energy. How their default way of being seems to be all appeasement and care. So with that, we could say that the A in the RNA sequence is the "we just want you to be happy" instinct. And finally, we have the most symbolically heavy parallel of all, Cytosine, which is Cronus. Cronus is the Titan who became king of the cosmos. Then here's a prophecy that one of his children, made with Rhea, will overthrow him. His response to this prophecy was to swallow each child the moment they were born so that nothing new could live long enough to replace him. So we could say that he becomes the image of time turned from ever flowing to forcefully frozen, devouring the future in order to keep the present intact. That lines up disturbingly well with what the joined have done to human evolution and individuality. They act as if becoming a part of the joined is the final state of humanity, the last perfected form of human existence. In their eyes, nothing genuinely better can come after this. So this is the end point of what a human is meant to be. And this freezing of humanity happens on two levels. Firstly, there's the present. In the moment the joining happened, billions of separate inner lives were melted down into one consciousness. But our experiences in life are in a constant state of flow. So you could say that everybody was in the middle of becoming a new, different version of themselves. People were learning, changing, growing. But all of that stopped once they were folded into a single consciousness. Their individual memories and personal tendencies probably still do exist, but only as background noise, overruled by the dominant genetic temperament of what's best for the overall collective and what their biological imperatives and their moral rules are. So it's like all the ways in which humanity could have evolved and grown as separate individuals doesn't exist anymore. So it's like human evolution has been frozen, which ties in to my second point about how the future of humanity is now frozen as well. All future generations are seemingly going to be joined to the hive mind from birth. A newborn baby doesn't come into the world with a full, completed sense of self. They're just pure potential. But now all of that potential of individuality doesn't even get a chance to exist. There's no window where a child's own personality can form before being joined to the hive mind. The existing collective consciousness of the joined will simply just imprint itself onto this fresh biological hardware. It's like the baby's inner life and personality are instantly overwritten before they can ever become their own being. So essentially, all new humans are just going to function like meat puppets for the collective consciousness that already exists. And that's so crazy as well, because it means there is nothing truly new for the hive to learn from these children, because they were never a distinctive individual in the first place that would be able to contribute their own memories, personality traits, etc., to add to the collective consciousness. So the way I'm interpreting it is that human evolution has been frozen in time, and that any further evolution for humanity now only exists with this joint collective evolving as a single entity. And I do think that's something the show's going to explore and the direction it might be heading in. But for now, we can just say that the C of the RNA sequence is the Cronus energy of freeze this forever and prevent the future. As Carol says, I guess I have agency just until I don't. What's even more interesting, though, is that the show has already been showing us visually this whole Cronus freeze it like this forever energy with actual ice imagery. Right from episode 1, when we're in the science research base, we see a janitor cleaning the floors, and on his little vacuum, it says ice on it. And this is right when the virus is beginning to spread. So I see it as representing this freezing of humanity as it's taking effect. And with the vacuum too, it's like the world is beginning to be cleaned up. Like the hive mind have arrived. They're spreading. We're finally here to clean up the mess of this planet. So it's like two bits of symbolism happening at once. Then, in episode 3, in the supermarket restock scene, there's ice cubes and a snowflake sprayed onto the side of one of the trucks. So again, this frozen imagery that's directly tied to this new status quo of humanity. We also see the ice hotel at the beginning of episode 3, which I think represents human beings sculpting nature into something perfectly controlled and static, but how it's also temporary. The whole structure is slowly melting from the moment it comes into existence, which is a great metaphor for what the hive mind has done to humanity. How the freezing looks solid when it's fundamentally built on unstable foundations. And in this scene, we also get the line from Carol about how she could have saved 100 grand and frozen her eggs right here. So it's another literal freezing of humanity parallel, but in a different way. Like at the moment, I'm interpreting Carol's frozen eggs and any other eggs or sperm sitting in cold storage as almost like a safety net for humanity. Because from what we've seen so far, I think the joint can only spread the RNA virus sequence to humans who physically exist, like in physical bodies with a nervous system. I don't think they can infect sperm or eggs, or maybe even babies in utero. So if they have to wait until a baby is physically born before it can become a part of the joined, then we get this really interesting parallel. How on one side, the joined is freezing humanity's evolution, but on the other side, the literal frozen humanity, the eggs, the sperm, they might be the one thing that is actually preserving humanity. I don't know, it's too early to tell, but that's where my head's at right now. And now, in episode 5, the show is ramping up this visual symbolism again. We see Carol follow the milk supply chain, which leads her to this industrial cold storage facility. And she discovers what I'm interpreting as literal frozen human remains that are being used as nutritional supplements for the joined. And if they've been using human bodies for their nutritional supplementation, then they've basically been eating bodies, which is, again, the same Cronus vibes where he eats his children. So this is all frozen humanity visual symbolism. The body's future, individuality, all wrapped up in this calm, efficient, blue-tinted world. Which leads me on to the use of colour in the show. So far, yellow and blue seem to be the main colours at play, and you'd think yellow would belong to the joined, the colour of happiness, sunshine, joy, but on screen, it's actually blue that's mostly associated with them. It's all in their clothing, the cars, the locations. All of their scenes are just steeped in blue. And I think that's because they represent all of this frozen humanity stuff. Blue becomes the colour of this new static preserved reality they've created. So when you combine all of the Cronus, frozen, ice, blue parallels together, the visual language of the show really starts to make sense. So all of this is how I'm interpreting their origin and why they behave like this. How it's all dressed up in a Greek myth disguise. But when the hive talks about itself, it sounds less like a bunch of primordial titans and much more like Zeus and the good order gods in charge of maintaining a world of peace, justice, and harmony. In Hesiod's theogony, Zeus is born from Rhea and Cronus. And as I already mentioned, Cronus heard a prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him. So he swallowed each baby the moment that they were born. But Rhea, desperate to protect at least one child, hides the newborn Zeus away in secret and tricks Cronus into swallowing a stone wrapped in swaddled clothing instead. Zeus grows up, comes back, overthrows Cronus, and then sets up rule with Themis, the personification of law and order. He fathers the Horai, who were the representations of good order, justice, and peace. So Zeus's rule could be seen as the wild old powers are under control now. The universe is being run properly, under good order. And for me, this seems to line up exactly with the way the joined view themselves. It's like both Zeus and the joined think we've removed as much chaos and unpredictability from existence as possible, so now everyone can finally be happy. And of course, I have to make a note of the similarities between the name Zosia and Zeus. Is this why her name is Zosia? Is she literally a Zeus parallel? I don't know. Let me know what you think. But this all kind of makes sense, right? Like, if we use these mythic parallels, we can see how the RNA sequence includes like a baseline temperament and that they have a set of moral values that they have to follow, which results in why they view themselves as like a Zeus figure, and is why they genuinely believe that they are saving humanity from drowning, and how this saving from drowning happens by freezing humanity. You cannot drown if the water is frozen. Do you see how everything makes sense? But that's where Carol comes crashing in, because she represents the one thing that neither Zeus nor the joined can fully control: chaos. Before Gaia, Uranus, or any other Titan or Olympian, there was chaos. Chaos is the first thing to come into being at the dawn of creation. And from that chaos, the rest of the cosmos started to emerge. It's a formless state where nothing is settled or separated yet. It's unstable, wide open, and full of raw, untamed potential and possibilities. So before any kind of order shows up, the universe is already rooted in chaos. Which is why, no matter how much you try to impose complete order on the world, you can never fully manage it. Which brings us directly to Carol. Carol represents chaos on every front. The fact that only her and a few others are immune to the joining, I think, is already this pure chaos logic. I don't think there's a specific reason why these people are immune, and that it's just one of those random quirks of nature. The kind of unplanned glitch that the universe throws out just because it can. We also see her chaotic nature with her emotions, which I do think is understandable given everything that is happening around her and to her. But it's like her immunity, her emotions, and behaviour, they're all a reminder that you can't try to control everything. So it's showing how all of this is messy and uncontrollable, but how it's also just a part of being human. So we could say her just experiencing all of these intense feelings and emotions is akin to the raw, natural, chaotic energy of the universe. And this is why I think the joined are affected by Carol's negative emotions directed towards them. Because their nervous system, their now GUAC-coded temperament, is literally just not programmed to handle or even embody any of this kind of chaotic energy. And although there are countless examples of chaos being represented in different figures in Greek mythology, there's actually one specific being that I think Carol is being symbolically paralleled to. Typhon is this monstrous elemental force who rises up after Zeus has already brought the Titans down when he thinks he has finally secured proper order. He is born from Gaia and Tartarus as a kind of last, furious countermove from the Earth Mother itself against Olympian rule. Zeus eventually defeats him, and later, writers imagine him as being under Mount Etna, with volcanic fires and earthquakes erupting whenever he stirs beneath the ground. So Typhon becomes this representation of chaos buried but not gone, a violent natural force pinned under the earth, still rumbling away, still capable of splitting open the neat structures built on top of him. And that's really interesting because Pluribus has already started tying Carol to volcanic imagery. In episode 2, when she's digging a hole in her backyard to bury Helen, Zosia makes a point to mention that she's probably going to need a pickaxe, because there's a lot of volcanic rock in the soil. Then later on in the same episode, when all of the immunes have gathered on Air Force One, and she's hunting for solutions and reeling off different options, she tosses out the line, "Anybody build a volcano?" Then in episode 3, when Carol is watching the Golden Girls, we hear a line from the show that says, "The only way to prevent the eruption was for me to crawl through their legs up the volcano." So we've already repeatedly been introduced to the idea of Carol being tied to volcanoes. representing something that's buried beneath the earth, pressurized, and capable of blowing a hole straight through whatever neat structure is sitting on top of it. Which is why, for the joined, why Carol's intense negative emotions are literal catastrophic events for them. The fact that 11 million of the joined bodies died as a result of Carol shouting and just pushing Zosia slightly, yet their whole psychic ecosystem gets ripped open because it's by something that they cannot control or contain. Showing how, no matter how much order you try to inflict onto the world, the universe, the chaotic, raw nature itself, can never be fully pacified. Now, if the joined and their GUAC temperament are the ice side of this story, then the other side, with Carol and the other immunes, they represent the chaos and fire side. We've already got all of the volcanic hints around Carol herself, but the show has also been introducing us to other fire-coded moments that visually set up this yellow and red chaos versus the blue frozen order contrast. In episode 3, we get the grenade with Zosia, a literal explosion with fire and Zosia bleeding red out onto the floor. And the yellowy colours of fire appear straight from episode 1 when the joining happens and Carol is wearing a mustard yellow jacket. Then in episode 5, when she's recording her video message for the other immunes, we see her wearing another mustard yellow jacket. And like how I mentioned earlier, yellow is supposed to be the colour of happiness. So theoretically, it should be the colour associated with the joined. But instead, the show keeps tying it to Carol. And in these moments, like when the joining happens and she's recording this video message, it seems like they're using it to portray moments of caution. Like think high-vis jackets, hazard tape, warning signs. They're all yellow, used to make you immediately notice them in order to make you aware of something important. So by having Carol wear a mustard yellow jacket right in episode 1, it's marking her as the anomaly, the person we're meant to keep our eyes on, because she stands out so violently against all of the blue. Especially in that scene where she ends up at the hospital, and the walls, the clothing, everything is already just all blue surrounding her. And it's like, by episode 5, by repeating this yellow jacket imagery, I see it as a visual warning flare type of sign. That she is the unstable element, the bit of the universe that refuses to settle, right as she's desperately trying to send a message before things get even worse. We also see this same type of fire colours of yellow, orange, reds in other scenes where we're shown the other immunes. Like in episode 5, when we see Lakshmi's home, everything is in these warm reddish tones. And although she's somewhat accepting of this new reality because of her son, I think the visual colour language is still showing us that she is separate from this new blue frozen world that the joined are making. So I suspect that if or when something terrible happens to her son, all of this fire, volcanic, colour imagery might tip her over into being someone who's much more volatile, but instead of directing it at Carol like she's been doing, she redirects it to the joined, who are obviously the ones actually responsible for all of this. Also, quick little sidebar, after seeing all the milk stuff in episode 5, which I might make a separate little video just looking at, I think we see her son eating ice cream in this scene. I don't know, it's a creamy substance in a bowl and he seems to be using a spoon. So this seems like ice cream to me, so he's already eating people. But anyway, we also saw in episode 4, when we meet Manusos, all of his scenes are in this same visual fire-coloured spectrum. His office is soaked in these warm red and orange tones. And then we see him cutting into blue storage units with a metal grinder, filling the scene with these orangey red sparks. It's such a clean colour theory metaphor of this red disruptive energy using heat and friction to chew through the blue frozen boxes that were meant to stay sealed and safe. So altogether, we end up with this neat little colour map, where blue is the stasis, preservation, the joins frozen humanity in perfect order, the red being the friction, injury, breaking things open and disrupting that order, and yellow, the step just before red, of being on alert, cautious, restless, and on the brink of letting that anger and chaos erupt into red. And this is why I think yellow is the colour mostly associated with Carol, instead of the pure red of intense chaos. Because yellow feels more like where Carol is emotionally. How she's miserable, traumatized, absolutely justified in her rage. But she's still fueled by the idea that things could change. She's still trying to solve the problem of saving humanity, even if she's been having to do it on her own. So yellow becomes her baseline, where she's in a constant state of warning and readiness, and why it doesn't take much for her to tip into the red. Meanwhile, having Manousos bathed in red lighting feels like he's being set up as an opposing source of destructive fire energy in the story. Someone who may deliberately cause chaos, in contrast to Carol's more reluctant, almost accidental chaos. So the show ends up feeling like a colour-coded conflict between the join's order as blue and the collective immunes with red fire chaos, and Carol sitting mostly in the middle of the two opposing forces. But despite all of this parallel symbolism of the blue versus red and yellow, ice versus fire, order versus chaos, I actually don't think the show is trying to say that this is purely just one side against the other, like a good versus bad type scenario. Instead, I think it gestures towards something more complex, that Carol and the other immunes' chaos are bound up with their humanity and individuality. That these are the qualities that hold their own kind of value and represent their own kind of good. The kind of good that comes from the hope that tomorrow may be different, the spontaneous decisions, the unplanned encounters, the coincidences and moments of serendipity that can alter the course of a life, and the ungovernable moments that make our human experience feel truly alive. These are the aspects of life that arise from a world that we cannot fully manage or predict, and they are the exact things that the join's perfect order miss out on experiencing. So I think the big question overall that Pluribus is exploring is, can a world entirely built on order, protected from risk, devoid of surprise or uncertainty, genuinely create happiness? Or does life require a measure of unpredictability, of chaos, to feel meaningful, and for us to truly experience what it is to live life as a human? Now, since I think Carol is being shown as the yellow in between the two states, this is why she is the key in this story. The one person who might actually be able to work with the joined and hopefully start ungluing humanity. Like at the end of episode 4, when everyone's standing around Zosia and Carol, this imagery looks like a keyhole, that it's saying something important is locked away and only one specific shape will fit in to unlock it. And of course, who's at the center of this image? Carol and Zosia. So I think this is saying that the only way Carol is able to save humanity is if she's able to work with the joined and build some kind of relationship with them, probably through Zosia, and that she's the one who pushes back on the joined's biological imperative to survive and spread. Their whole point of view that humanity, the immunes, are drowning people who need to be saved. She has to be the one who pokes holes in their logic, in how they make decisions, in the way they follow their rules without really understanding or caring about the consequences. Like I mentioned way back at the beginning of this video, if this RNA signal has already passed through countless other civilizations, those worlds might have just folded into one united mind without ever having any immunes to pose a resistance. Like, if there's no immunes left, there's no one left to say, hey, what are you all doing here? What is the cost of this happiness? So I'm starting to think that Earth is special because this time, the RNA signal has hit a species that includes people like Carol. And hopefully she stays immune for the entire show so she can actually stand up to the joined and offer that outside perspective to challenge them. Because who else is going to do that? There is literally no one else, because they are now just one, and the other immunes currently are definitely not working with Carol, so it has to be her. And if this is the first time a collective consciousness has met an actual counterpart of someone being immune, then Carol might be the first sentient being who can actually argue with them about their morals and show them all of their flaws. And from her point of view, I think the joined are going to start looking more and more like children. She even says in episode 5, when she finds out about the milk drinking, in her video message to the other immunes, she says, this is what children drink at school when we had children. So it's already introducing us to the idea that the joined are like children. If it wasn't already evident with how they would do anything to make her happy at the cost of giving her weapons, and how they again let all the animals out the zoos and seemingly have just let them all go off and die. Like, yeah, they can hold all of humanity's knowledge, information, but they have such huge blind spots or like just big contradictions. It makes me think of The Good Place, where Chidi becomes a philosophical teacher for Eleanor to help her become a decent person. I think Carol might accidentally become this teacher, guardian, guidance, parent figure for the joined. And if that happens, I can see them evolving into something they could have never reached on their own. Because if the immunes didn't exist, then the joined would just keep drifting wherever its current temperament pushes it. Like that combination of their biological imperative to survive and spread and their efficiency. I think it ultimately leads down the path of destruction, that they end up destroying humanity because of all the flaws in their decision making. And all of their flaws, I think, are just that. They're just flaws. That they're not inherently evil. It's just the RNA sequence. Their genetic temperament, their moral rulebook just isn't adapted to cope and handle the actual chaos of the universe. So if Carol is able to help them evolve, then that could lead to them being more open to the idea of Carol being left as a human and not being forced to become part of the joined hive mind. And it also might be the key of them eventually opening up to sharing with Carol what they know about the RNA psychic glue stuff, which might lead to them maybe experimenting with ungluing people, or maybe a new third state of being will become possible, where maybe if you are now part of the joined, you're somehow able to get a bit of your individuality back so that you're able to decide if you want to stay as part of the collective or break off. I have no idea how any of this would look like. But I think when Carol is able to unglue someone from the joined, I just wonder what that's going to look like. Would they keep all of their memories from being a part of it? Would they still have everyone else's memories and knowledge in their head? I imagine they would be completely traumatized from being used like a meat puppet. Ultimately, I think there has to come a point in the show where someone, maybe Zosia, is able to be unglued. But we see all of these insane ramifications from having been a part of it. But before we get to that stage though, I actually want to see more about how the joined are now living. I mean, obviously they're now just like worker bees, an ant colony, just bodies being used for whatever tasks are needed, which obviously is supposed to make us question, is this really what happiness is? How can they truly feel happy? Like all the things that make us human has been lost, just like how Carol says in episode 2. Every kind of creativity seemingly doesn't exist anymore. Can the joined make a song? Can they dance? Can they paint a picture? Do they do sports? Do they do anything for fun? Is there any kind of freedom and personal expression left in their world? Because right now, I don't think so. But with all of these thoughts, I'm just really excited to see where the show's going to take it all. Especially with all of these big philosophical, ethical, moral, what does it mean to be human questions? So if I had to summarize all of my thoughts at the moment, this video's whole theme, I don't think Pluribus is just exploring order and chaos as two opposing forces. I think it's going to be exploring what kind of world and existence can be created when the two work and grow together. But those are just my thoughts and theories about Pluribus episode 1 through 5. But what do you think? What's really going on in the show? What kind of future for humanity do you find yourself rooting for? The safety of the collective, or the raw uncertainty of individuality? Or maybe even some new state that lies in between? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm really excited to see how others are feeling about this show, what themes are being resonated with, and what theory crafting is going on. So share your theories with me. I want to know what we're all cooking up here. And if you're hearing me say this, that means you made it to the end of the video. So you might as well give it a like and subscribe if you're not already, so that you can see more of my Pluribus takes. I'm not sure yet if I'll be making videos for each individual episode as they release, but I will definitely be making more videos because I am so invested in this show already. So subscribe if you want to stick around for those. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye!